all know of Jesus, Joseph, and Mary. However, there's one that preceded that, the legacy of Ast, Ausar, and Heru.
We were talking about why there are very few videos or descriptions that you can find on the internet of the story of Ausar and Heru.
I am Mfundishi Jehutimas, Ka in Heru, Hassan Salim. I'm going to briefly talk about the importance of the Trinity, Ausar, Auset, and Heru.
It comes down to us today in the Greek names of Isis, Osiris, and Horus. But we who are reclaiming our legacy, prefer to use the original names, Ast, or Set, Ausar, and Heru.
We say their names the way our ancestors said them. And this is why I push the Medunection, so that we can speak the language of our ancestors. They wrote everything in stone, so that we wouldn't be lost. It's like they knew we would be lost now.
It is when the Greeks actually came to Kemet, and they recognized that they didn't really understand the story, that they began telling a narrative story. So you'll see the Isidi et Osiris. That is the Greek version. That is really the only clear narrative story. But here's the problem. If you're familiar with the things that reference Ast, Ausar, and Heru, and then you read the narrative written by the Greeks, it seems that some of their worldview entered into their narrative telling. Problematic.
And then the story was transformed. There's a book called 16 Crucified Saviors Before Christ, where 16 people tried to imitate exactly what Heru did in respect to Ausar and Auset.
But know this, that part of the reason why you hold on to that Bible is because many of your own stories are inside that book. A lot of the ancestral wisdom is inside that book, and that's what keeps you bound there. However, along with the moral guides that you will find inside the Bible, some of the beautiful stories you'll find in there, you'll also find indications of the people of the culture who stole your story and made it into a history. Because all you will hear about is the exploits of the shepherds of Asia Minor. You will hear nothing about the farmers and gardeners of the Nile, who taught those shepherds everything that they know.
Now that when people talk about Ausar and Heru, there's some discomfort around it, because once you even hear a basic telling of the story, you recognize that the other stories you're more familiar with, those that come to us through the Abrahamic traditions, have borrowed from them. And so people have discomfort even with the basic story.
The first little capital in Paris, which is Paris today, was the cult of Auset. So Par-As means the worship of Auset. And in many places in Europe, which is the Black Madonna. So many places in Europe today, they still worship Auset as the Black Madonna. The Pope kneels before the Black Auset, the Black Madonna. The birthing scene, where you see Jesus suckling from Mary, that comes from Heru and Auset. So everybody is imitating the foundation that we laid in ancient Kemet.
We're not talking about a story that's similar, we're talking about the original story, because this story, in all its similarities, is thousands of years earlier than the story that is told in Christianity. And perhaps that's also why this image that you see of Ast with Heru on her lap then becomes a very familiar image in the Christian world. Sometimes you'll hear it called the Pieta, sometimes you'll hear it called the Madonna and Child, and you know that it is an image of Mary with Jesus on her lap. But in actuality, that image that becomes so popular in the Christian world is, in my opinion, an echo of an earlier story. It is the story of how Ast takes in the divine seed of Ausar and gives birth to the heir Heru. And so that's an important way for us to understand this.
Their own book admits that Abraham and Sarah were spared and rescued by the hospitality of the Nile Valley Africans. That same book, in the book of Acts 7, chapter 22nd verse, will tell you that their prophet Moses who brought the Decalogue, or the so-called Ten Commandments, was taught in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and deeds. That same book will tell you that Yeshua, who they now call Jesus, was spared the wrath of Herod because they were invited into the land of Kemetic to fulfill the prophecy, out of Egypt have I called my son, when the mother Mary brought Yeshua, now miscalled Jesus in the Latin name, into the land of the Nile. And he, at a very young age, I think at the age of 12, began to inquire in the temple. No wonder that he learned so much that when he went back up to the land of Canaan, now known as Palestine or Israel, that he was then set upon and murdered by Rome.
So it's important for us to understand not only the Trinity, but the Trinity is African, the Trinity is black, and that everybody is Xeroxing or biting hard off of our legacy. And so we as an African people have to snatch our legacy back.
When we look at the texts that our ancestors, our Kemetic ancestors, have left behind, most of them are actually not narrative. Most of them are really manuals that were left behind for rituals. So when you look at the Rayu Perdamu Ger, mostly you're seeing rituals that are connected with the process of making the transition from the world of the living to the world that comes after, the world of the afterlife. Tasek Ma'at, the place where those who practice Ma'at go.
First of all, Neter is our name for the divine. Some say Netera, some say Nebercher. All of those are creditable names for the divine of the earliest ancestors who lived in the Nile Valley and who grew the world's longest lasting and most prosperous civilization that the world has ever known, for which we left many records in stone and on papyrus.
They represent images, ideal images that we are supposed to emulate within our society and within our life. For example, Ausar means the eye of the throne. He is the eye of the throne. The eye, the word means to do or to make. Auset, his mate, is the throne maker. So she represents the great royal wife who was the throne maker. And so you can see, when you see her name, you see the throne. When you see his name, you see the throne with the eye. So I'm just trying to give you an idea. So she is the throne maker. He is the doer of the throne, the one who carries out the mission. He is the protector of the throne. And their son, Heru, represents the continuation of this rulership. So every living king in ancient Kemet was Shimsu Heru, follower of Heru. So the living king was a personification of Heru. So all of their names in the early stages there was a Heru name. That's the first name the king has. It was a Heru name. And then every king, when they die, becomes Ausar. So if you look on Tutankhamun's tomb, on the wall it says Tutankhamun Ausar, because Ausar represents resurrection, rebirth, renewal.
I'm honored to be able to speak to you about it, particularly because I know that my teacher has already spoken to you about it, Baba Heru, Kurasaman Sepata. And I know that while I was a college student, I read portions of the story and did research on the story, but the best retelling I ever received was when I was a student in the Shrine of Ptah. There actually was an older priestess that would come during our initiation. She would sit in a darkened room on a chair, and all of us would just be sitting there and rapt by her words. She's made her transition now, but she was amazing in telling the story. So when I tell the story, I always have to give honor and thanks to that shrine that I grew up in. Let's describe it that way. I was an adult when I got there, but I really grew up there. The Shrine of Ptah tries to tell the story in a way that is useful today.
So today we're going to talk about this legacy of Ast, Ausar, and Heru. They were sent to Earth. Ast and her complement, Ausar, together with Nebuchadnezzar, her sister, and Nebuchadnezzar's brother or consort Set.
When you talk about the story of Ausar and Heru, you have to begin sort of with their birth, what they're made of. And in understanding that, some of the other parts of the story are clearer, they make more sense. We should understand that as the world was being created by the divine entity that some might call Atum, we begin to see that these great Neteru, these great deities, are not in the picture initially. And it's believed that Tehuti or Jehuti, the personage that has now been misnomered as Thoth, comes and makes a bargain with Ra that none of these divine forces will come forward during the year, any of the days of the year. And so at that point, according to this myth, the year was considered to be 360 days. And it kind of makes sense. If we're talking about the route that the earth takes around the sun, if you want to think of it as circular, then thinking of that route as being 360 degrees or 360 days might make sense. But in the way it actually moves, we know today that it's closer to 365 days and 1/4 of a day. And so our ancient Kemetic ancestors described that transition from a 360 day year to a 365 day year as the bargain that Tehuti or Jehuti makes with Ra. So in this bargain, 5 extra days are added. Sometimes the Greeks would call them the epagomenal days. These are the days that Ausar comes forth, that Ast, his sister wife, comes forth, that Set comes forth, that Inbet-Het comes forth, and of course, Heru the Elder comes forth. Now here's an interesting part of this story. Brother William, I find this part very interesting. Heru, sometimes when you read Western stories, by the way, they say this is not the same Heru, this is Heru the Elder. But in actuality, I would argue that our ancestors did believe it was the same Heru. They were making a commentary. So that Heru is to be the son of Ast and Ausar, but he is created at the same time as his parents and then held in abeyance is the way that we say it. He's held back to come forth later. What is the commentary? Well, in order to understand the commentary, we should also understand that in the Kemetic language, when we hear the word Heru, that ul sound at the end is a sound that seems to evoke plurality. So that in many ways, Heru is not really one person. Heru is an archetype for all of us. Now, all of the Neteru are, but in the telling of the story of Ausar and Heru, it is clearest for us to understand that part of what we have to do is best told in the story of Heru. And so that is why I believe he has a plural sound at the end of his name.
Heru represents this concept that when Isfet has been done, Isfet is wrongdoings, that which is evil, that which is bad, that Heru is there to bring about Ma'at. And so Heru fights against his uncle to defeat him and to bring Ma'at back into the society. And so that's what we are supposed to do as African warriors.
In the New Kingdom, when there is a new child that comes forward as part of a divine triad, Kansu also has a U sound at the end of his name. So Kansu, Heru, we're saying that we are the divine children. But back to Heru, if you come forward at the same time with your parents, what does that really mean? And in fact, what does it mean that Ausar and Ast are siblings? When there are individuals that hear that who don't have a deeper understanding of the mythos that is being told, they make it sound like, well, there's something wrong here, because if they're siblings, how could they be married and then have intercourse and have children? But in actuality, there's a commentary being made. The commentary is that Ausar and Ast, those individuals that are depicted by the Greeks as Osiris and Isis, are actually equals. They have the same amount of divine energy. That's the commentary that's being made. So we can focus on the fact that they're siblings, or we can focus on the fact that there's a more important story that's trying to be told by calling them siblings. And so then you should understand that if Heru is also in many ways their sibling, the commentary is you are as ancient and as strong as those people who created you.
Heru, the principle of the hero, the principle of the one who becomes the avatar for the early ancestors of the Nile, that was held in abeyance and did not yet come to earth. But later, Heru manifested in the person of Heru.
Heru represents not only higher consciousness, but one who fights against Isfet. Ausar is the wisdom teacher. He represents good, eternal good, righteousness. He is the protector of the family, but he represents righteousness.
There were many people on this earth before the earthborn principles, and when they came, they found that these people had been in disobedience to basic Ma'atian laws, and so Ausar decided to begin to travel to help them to change their ways. Some of them were into cannibalism and all manner of debauched practices. And Ausar came and took up the role as their healer, and he went around using music to charm them and to teach them the art of cultivation of soil in order to stop all the hunting and the killing of animals and so on for food. And so that's how agriculture began. Now this story is what you will call a myth. And a myth is a symbolic story that allows you to follow principles of creation in a way that makes it accessible to your consciousness.
Here's an image of Ausar here. Ausar, interestingly, has then been told as the first ruler of Kemet. Now I want to be clear that Ausar is, that all of the individuals we're talking about are individuals that occur in allegory. We're not talking about people that exist like you or I exist. They are not literal people. They are created to tell important information to those of us who are trying to live divine sacred lives here on the physical plane today. So that he is a mythological being. So Ausar is mythologically the first king of Kemet. He's the person that first teaches them how to engage in the art of animal husbandry. He is the one that teaches them how to irrigate the fields. He's the one that teaches them, and this is something that you need to hear and then understand its deeper meaning. He's the one that teaches them the cultivation of the grape and the cultivation of grain. In many ways, that means that Ausar is also a deity that is connected to bread and wine. And so these are the things that Ausar does. He also is known to teach teach literacy. He's supposed to be the person that brings literacy to Kemet. And as he creates this nation along with his powerful wife queen, Ast, as they are on the throne and leading Kemet in a position of prosperity, something interesting happens. He then decides that his goal is not simply to bring prosperity to Kemet, but to the entire world. So he goes out in the world to lead it to civilization as well. Now during this time, sometimes we should understand that if he's leaving, someone should be leading in his stead. And I like to think about this process of deciding who would lead in his absence. It's almost as a modern press conference. So imagine the press conference where Ausar is coming before the people and he's about to tell them he's telling them about this great journey that they already know is going to take place to give civilization to the rest of the world. And he's about to tell them who will be on the throne to make sure that Kemet remains prosperous. And I always think of his brother Set, or as the ancient Kemetic people first called him Sutek. Sutek is his earliest name. and sometimes that's rendered Sutesh, by the way, you should know. Sutek actually is sitting at the conference, and he hears that someone's going to be chosen to stay on the throne, and you can imagine him sort of puffing out his chest and straightening his garments because he thinks that he's going to come to the podium. And then Ausar takes a moment and he says, the person that is going to lead Kemet is actually someone that you know well, my queen Ast. And so you could only imagine at that press conference the drama, right? Sutesh or Sutek is absolutely enraged. He says, this is my brother. I am equal to him. Why is it that I am not going to be ruler of Kemet in his stead? And so from that moment on, he begins to plot a plan to usurp Ausar. So Ausar goes off and teaches the rest of the world civilization, and Ast is on the throne, leading Kemet as appropriately and as adequately as you should expect an ancient African queen to do. In many ways, this is a commentary once again about the role that women play in ancient African societies. They're not seen as secondary citizens. They're not seen as less intelligent, less powerful as men. They are seen as our equal, and if not our equal, sometimes even primary.
Ausar went around teaching the principles of agriculture and using music and charming the people. He became very popular. And when he came back from his triumphant journey to the hinterlands to teach the art of agriculture, Set, his brother, became jealous of his popularity and decided to murder Heru. So they convened a banquet, and at the end of the banquet, they played a game called Who Fits the Coffer. I'm paraphrasing the story now, but so you essentially get the whole meaning of it. And they brought out a beautiful coffin, with jewels all over it, and people at the party at this celebration for Ausar's return took turns getting into the coffer, but it didn't fit any of them until at the very end, Ausar, who was the one that was celebrating, decided to get in the coffer, and sure enough, it fit him to a T, because Set made sure that when he had the coffer made, that it was made in order to just fit one person, Ausar. And when Ausar got into the coffer, Set and some conspirators, some say there were 72 conspirators, closed the lid of the coffin, and Ausar suffocated and died inside the coffin. And so Ast was overpowered, and the conspirators took the coffer, and they took it to the bank of the river, and they threw it into the river, and it floated out to sea. And the coffer got caught up with Ausar's body, and it got caught up in a tree on the Isle of Byblos.
When Ausar returns after his trip abroad, let's dramatize the story a little bit. He speaks to his queen and he says, I'm back and I'm pleased to be back, and how did things go? And she says, they went very well, but I think you should be cautious because I have gotten word. I truly believe that your brother was completely enraged by the fact that you did not allow him to lead this great nation. And Ausar says, no, I don't think you're right. I think that he's fine with it. In fact, he's actually called for an amazing feast in my honor upon my return. And Ast says, well, I know you're not listening to me, but I think you need to understand that you should be concerned. And Ausar says, no, he's my brother. I'm going to be fine. Now, of course, for those of us brothers who have wonderful African queens by our side, you know that African queens do what they want to do. That in our community, black women are powerful, intelligent, and able, and they are not led. They lead with us. So imagine in this story that is being told thousands of years ago, the queen decides not to go with the king. Can you imagine that? In many ways, we're talking about what African women are like, right? They have minds of their own. and that's acceptable in African civilization, not as acceptable in other social mores for other nations. So Ausar goes to the ceremony that Set has planned for him by himself. And in fact, imagine that Ast is back at the palace, and her sister comes with her. Her sister is in the palace with her. Now, this is a very interesting role that the sister plays. Her sister is actually the wife of Sutek, of Set, a beautiful lady that we call Inbedhet. Understand that I think that Inbedhet is a key character that doesn't get enough focus, that we need to do a little bit more research on the places where we find ancient texts that mention her, because I think that her role in this entire myth is quite instructive. She is the wife of Set, the sister of Ausar and Ast and Set, and she decides that she's going to be with her sister rather than her husband. Once again, this is a commentary on the role that women play with each other. Today, we often hear that women have trouble getting along with each other. That I know that as I speak to sisters, they say sometimes they don't like to spend time with other women because they're catty, they're divisive. Well, in our ancient African story, we have a reminder of the role that women should play in each other's lives. So imagine that in Bedhet, that character that the Greeks called Nephthys, is actually in the throne with her sister Ast, and she's braiding her hair. It is there that they get word that Ausar, who has gone off to be at this celebration with his brother, has been killed by his brother. And that a celebration is not actually what has been planned, but instead a coup. That Set plans to take the throne from Ausar in a violent manner. So Ausar is killed. It is said that Set has 72 accomplices. Sometimes they're described as Nubian accomplices, but that's a whole other section of the story that we can spend an hour talking about.
Ausar was killed by his brother, Setesh. Setesh wanted the throne and was jealous of his brother. And so he ripped his brother eventually into 14 pieces and scattered them throughout. Auset, with the help of her sister, Nephthys, and then they got all the pieces and put them back together, except for the 14th piece. The 14th piece was the phallus, and the phallus was thrown into the Hapi River, which today we call the Nile River, and believed to be eaten by the catfish and the fish. So some ancient Kemetic didn't eat fish because of that. So you understand this parallel. That's why fish was like a taboo in some of the areas.
I'm sure if I read the myth today, I'd probably see some sections of the story that I hadn't seen before, because this is something else that happens when you read spiritual allegory. It occurs at different levels, and so you continue to read them because there's some things that you understand now that perhaps are relevant to where you are at this moment. But as you read it again, something else is relevant. But in that story, it is said that Set actually makes a wonderful garment for his brother, right? And in making that garment, when he actually invites Ausar over, he says to all of the guests, anyone who can fit this garment can have it. It's an amazing garment. So everyone's trying it on, and it doesn't fit anyone. Yes, this even has echoes in other fairy tales. Yes, it does. Because remember, this great story is one that has echoes throughout the modern world. And of course, only one person is able to fit the garment because, unbeknownst to Ausar, the garment was actually made to his precise measurements. So as soon as he puts it on, he says, wow, this fits me perfectly. Everyone cheers that it is his garment, but then Set bounds him with chains and throws him in the Hapi. So in many ways, I think we can say that that Ausar is probably killed by suffocation or by asphyxiation or by drowning. And so maybe that's the best way for us to describe it. But like I said, this is the kind of thing you have to continue to read, because I'm sure there are even aspects of this story that we should be told. By the way, as we talk about him being cut into 14 pieces, what are some of the other things that we should understand? In order for him to be whole, he has to be bound, because the pieces are separate, so he's bound. So in some ways, philosophically, mythologically, he is the first Sahu. He's the first Sa. He is the first mummy. And so this is one of the reasons why the Kemetic people see mummification, or as I call it, Sahuification, as the process of making the transition between the land of the living and the land of everlasting.
So Aust, she went looking for the body of her husband, and some children playing by the shore of Byblos told her, yeah, there is a coffer in that tree over there. And she went, and sure enough, she saw the coffer. But the king of Byblos was sailing, and he took the whole tree. She had the whole tree uprooted and took it to his courtyard and set it in the middle of his court, and it became the primary pillar, with the coffer still caught up in it. So Aust went to the king's palace, and she pretended to be a wet nurse for the king's child. And one day, when she was nursing the child, Aust, being a woman of great hekau, great spiritual power, she was passing the king's child over a fire in order to convey the immortality on this child. And the mother of the baby, of the king's baby, screamed, and it broke the spell. And so she said to her husband, get this woman out of here, because she wants to burn my baby, which she did not want to do. She just wanted to infuse this child with the power of life eternal. So Aust said, she then confessed who she really was, that she was not really a nurse, that she was the wife of the man who was inside the coffer. And she explained who she was, and that the king was murdered, and she would like to take the body of her husband back to Kemetic. So the king consented, the king of Byblos consented, and she took the coffer back, and she hid it in some bulrushes by the shore of the Nile. And Set, the jealous brother who originally did the foul deed of killing Ausar, causing him to suffocate, he was so angry when he found the coffer by the shore of the river that he opened it and took the body of Ausar out, and he cut it into 14 pieces. And the henanum, or the penis, what they call penis now, he threw in the river, and it was swallowed by a fish.
Now you could imagine that Aust is dealing with the greatest of sorrow. Her husband has been killed. And not only has he been killed, they did not have the opportunity to bear an heir. So she is in great sorrow. She does not have the opportunity to actually mourn him properly, because they both know, Austin and Inbethet know, that if Set is planning a coup and if he has killed Ausar, the next person he must kill must be Aust. Because she was the one that led Kemet in Asar's absence. So you would imagine the people would expect her to return to the throne in the absence of Ausar. And so Aust and her sister Inbethet then go on a great journey to escape the army, the confidants of Set, as they chase after them. Once again, we see another commentary on the role that women must play in each other's lives, because we see Inbethet not go to become queen of Kemet. Can you imagine being a queen of the most powerful nation in the land? That must have been a very vaunted status. Instead of actually looking out for her own benefit, she actually looks out for the benefit of her sister. So they go on this great journey. And they end up going on this journey not simply to escape Set, but also to find the pieces of Ausar. Because once Set realizes that Aust has disappeared, he is quite frightful that she will find the body of Ausar and use Hekau, words of power, to resurrect him, to bring him back into existence. Because she is also known as the lady who knows all the names. She is known as a lady that's connected to the divine in a manner that is quite exceptional, so that she should be able to have control over the relationship of life and death. So he then takes Ausar and cuts his body into 14 pieces, strewing them around the land. Auset and Bedhead then have to go on this journey finding each of the pieces of Ausar. And in the story, there's even a description as to where each of the pieces were found. In Kemet, those places where each of the places were found consider their city, their area, to be a sacred place because, say for example, we were the place where the leg was found. So in many ways, they take this mythological story and they look at this as a way to describe the importance of their city in the protection of the concept of the divine. If you are the place where the head was found, then of course those people, those students of the sacred arts that are there, should truly be able to focus on how to be divine, because you are in fact an important location in the Kemetic mythos.
Auset and her sister, when they came and they saw that the coffer was gone, they heard some rumors that that Set had done this foul deed and had buried the parts of Ausar all over. And so they took Anpu, the jackal, having a great sense of smell, the original dog, and wherever he sniffed, they found a body part. And Auset and her sister Nebuchadnezzar gathered the body of Ausar in one place, and they put his body back together again. And the henanum that was lost and swallowed by a fish, they made out of wood. By the way, when I grew up in the islands, we used to call the henanum, what they call penis or phallus, a wood. So it means that we may have still held on to that ancient story by calling the penis a wood. At any rate, when they were able to get the full body of Ausar together, then Auset and her sister, Auset was at his feet, and they laid him out on the lion's couch, and they put Nebuchadnezzar, she was at the head with her wings, and she was fanning Ausar with her wings. This is where the Christians got the idea of angels with wings from. There are pictures of this that were drawn on the temple walls to show this ritual taking place. And as Ausar, as she began to fan, Ausar took the breath of life and came alive, just long enough for Auset, who was at his feet, to transform herself into a female falcon. And they attached the henanum at his navel, not down here, but right at the navel. And Auset turned into a female falcon and came down on this organ and took the seed of Heru into her womb and became pregnant with the new and returning Savior.
So, they find the pieces, and wherever they find the pieces, they properly bandage it and prepare it and collect it so that they can recreate Ausar. Many of you know that of the 14 pieces, one of them is not found. And that one piece that is not found is actually the henanum, the phallus, the penis of Ausar. That piece, some people say, was eaten by a fish, so it was not able to be found. It was not able to be found in the Hapi. So what does Auset do? She does Hekau, words of power, and she recreates the henanum of Ausar in order for him to be whole and for him to be able to be mythologically or symbolically resurrected so that they are able to have an heir. And the recreation of Ausar is actually, the recreation of the henanum of Ausar is actually one of the ways that we see the image of the Tekken. That thing that the Greeks called the obelisk. Now, of course, we don't use the word obelisk because one of the reasons why they called this an obelisk is because they thought it looked like a meat skewer. So when the Greeks came to Kemet, they called these great, massive structures that in many instances, maybe as many as 300 tons, carved out of one very hard stone in a manner that we still cannot completely fathom today. They look at these and they say, oh, they look like shish kebabs. And that's the word for obelisk. So that's the reason why, once I describe what you probably know as an obelisk, I no longer use the term because in many ways using it is disrespectful of your ancestors, your African ancestors' ability to do something in great excellence in the fields of engineering, architecture, geology, and definitely in according to its great sacred mythos. So this is the Tekken, and it is the recreated phallus of Ausar.
So what they did was resurrect a Tekken, which is symbolic of the penis of ancient Ausar, to give birth to Heru. And so that's why you see them on both sides of the temple. We see the ancient and we see the birth of the new, and we are all charged with that. And so that was part of this legacy that went on for over 4,000 years.
So as she recreates the Tekken of Ausar, she takes in the divine seed of Ausar, and she is then able to give birth to the heir, to give birth to their child. This is perhaps the world's first described sacred insemination, the world's first described birth that occurs without earthly intercourse. And so sometimes when we look at this story through the eyes of the Abrahamic traditions, it is called an immaculate conception. That is how we hear Mary, in this case, receive the child that would come from the divine, that would become Jesus. But in actuality, in the ancient African story, I think that they would not have called it an immaculate conception, because that would imply that all other conception is not clean or immaculate, that it must be dirty. And so I don't think Africans would quite describe it that way. By the way, you should know that when we talk about the sacred insemination of Auset, sometimes it's described with almost all of the layers of intrigue and the details that we see in the story of the insemination of Mary. And so that is an amazing part. There are even some stories where you see images of Tehuti coming to Auset and telling her that she's going to be able to receive the seed of Ausar, and then she gives birth to Heru. This is very similar to that story that is told in the Christian world.
That Ausarian position represents resurrection, rebirth. If you look at the Washington Monument, you'll see George Washington in the Ausarian position at the Tekken in Washington, D.C., saying he is the father of the country.
On an artifact known as the Metternich Stele in the Metropolitan Museum. In that museum, you'll see this this beautiful, intricately carved artifact that tells the story of how Auset now is actually continuing her exile with the child that is Heru. And she has to continue to flee the armies or the confidants of Set, who are looking for now both of them, Heru and Auset, to dispense with, because if they return, perhaps they will be considered the rightful heirs of the throne. And so it is said that Auset, who was actually a queen of the most powerful nation in the world, has to actually dress in rags, and she has to survive by cleaning the homes of wealthy women. I'm going to say to you that that aspect of the story sounds very familiar to some of the challenges that African women and women of African descent have experienced, particularly in the last 500 years, and even today. If we live in Manhattan, I'm in Manhattan right now. If you just go a few miles down and you just go to sit in Manhattan's, New York City's famous Central Park, you will see virtually a gigantic parade of small Tamil, small European children with their African, Caribbean, and African American nannies. So in some ways you see these women that are the descendants of the world's most ancient societies, and the only way they can survive is by taking care of the homes and the children of other people. And so Auset does this as well.
I have a video called The Tekken, and it shows that all of Washington, D.C., America, was supposed to be Kemet in the West. And they were trying to imitate everything from ancient Kemet. And so a lot of times I have Africans in America go, ancient, what's this fascination with Kemet? How's that going to help us today? Not understanding that the very people who's exploiting it, the very people who are ruling the world are studying ancient Kemet. Egyptology. And you have to understand that Egyptology created in the 1800s had to substantiate white supremacy. And they had to whiten it up so that they didn't want you to understand that this greatness you see, Kemet, these are just African people. And so when you see the beauty of Ausar, when you see the beauty of Auset, when you see the beauty of Heru, this trinity, these are all African people. So that would inspire you to be like them. And your a symbol of excellence would be these black images.
As Heru was born and began to grow up, Ast told Heru why he was born, that he was born to avenge the wrongs done to his father by his uncle, and that he must right that wrong by fighting his uncle and reclaiming the throne that the uncle had taken from Ausar by force, and to also avenge the wrongs and the disrespect of his mother Ast. So he was taught at a very young age what his duty was, which was to restore Ma'at, because Ma'at, the principle of righteousness, truth, balance, order, all those good things, was violated by Set, who used might instead of right in order to gain the ascendancy of the throne of Ausar. So as Heru grew up, he knew that he had to battle his uncle. By the way, the thread of that story has been preserved by William Shakespeare in his play called Hamlet, where Hamlet has to avenge the death of his father, which was taken by his uncle, and you remember his uncle married Hamlet's father's mother, Gertrude, and therefore you see, again, a Kemetic story became the foundation for a Caucasian story known as Hamlet. Later on, other people took that same story and created the movie The Lion King, using the same principles again of the old king who had died, the young one who's now going to become the one in the king's favor, in the king's stead, and begin to and avenge the wrongs done to his father.
Ast is on her journey with Heru, and at one point on this artifact, we hear that she is looking for a place to stay because now she's in the middle of inclement weather. And the people that answer their doors say to her, there is no room. I know that story sounds familiar. The one I'm telling you is thousands of years earlier than the one that you heard. And so as they tell her there is no room, eventually what happens is one of the confidants of Set, of Sutek, the person that's looking for Ast and Heru to dispense with them, to kill them, this confidant, who is a scorpion. In fact, I think there are 7 scorpions, but the lead scorpion's name is Moth Death. That's how he actually has a name in the story. He realizes that they see Heru. And so what do? The 6 scorpions put their venom on the tip for the lead scorpion so that it can be even more potent, even more dangerous to human beings. And the scorpion sneaks up behind Ast, reaches towards Heru, and strikes him. Heru is killed. You can imagine the double sorrow of Ast. She's gone on this journey. She knows that she's on a sacred spiritual journey, and so this is very difficult for her. She cries to the heavens, and eventually Tehuti, the symbol of divine wisdom, comes down and whispers in her ear the words that she can use to resurrect her son. And she speaks in his ear, and the artifact, the thing that has been misnomered, the Mennonite stele, actually says that once she speaks into the ear of Heru, he breathes again. And then he becomes the symbol of victory over death. So this is another resurrection story. From there on, you're going to see these devices in Kemet whose names are actually lost. I don't know if we know the ancient African term for these devices, but in the Greek world, they would have called, I think this is in the Roman world actually, they would have called these Sipi. And so you'll see these Sipi of Heru, where he's standing on top of crocodiles, holding a lion, holding a scorpion, holding snakes, and that rectangular item, statue, carving, would have been particularly in temples, at the front of temples. And each day the priest would pour water over these devices. There would have been a rectangular basin that is likely copper or bronze underneath it, and the water would collect. And from there, anyone coming in would use that water to purify themselves before entering the temple. Now listen, I'm going to tell you I grew up as a Roman Catholic. And I know that as I attended any Roman Catholic church, the first thing I would do upon entry would be to look for that small receptacle, that small basin that contained what was generally called holy water. And I would use it to sanctify myself, making the sign of the cross before entering that church. Well, I'm going to tell you that in ancient Kemet, that practice itself was one that long predates the Christ mythos, long predates the Christian church. This is perhaps the world's first use of holy water in this manner. And we can see it as another way to tell the story of Ausar and Heru. So, the story continues, and Auset is struggling to raise a child without a father. I know that that never happens. We never see our great sisters having to toil in the homes of other people, taking care of their children. This is a story that we're not familiar with, right, Brother William? And we also don't see that our sisters today struggle to raise children without their fathers, right? I'm saying to you that this story has so much meaning when we even look at it with the eyes that we have today in our contemporary society. So she struggles to raise this boy without his father. And at the point where he becomes just old enough that maybe he's a teenager, he believes that he now knows enough information to go and reclaim the throne from his uncle, Set, or Sutek, who has taken it wrongfully from his father. Auset, of course, tells him that he's not quite ready, and that she's been training him. In this instance, you can even say she's training him to fight. So perhaps we're thinking of an ancient African martial arts form, and with all the wisdom that he needs. But of course, he's a young man. So what does he do when she's not looking? He says, I'm a man. Why in the world do I need her to tell me anything else? I'm ready. And he goes off to do battle with his uncle Set. And they have this great battle, this incredible battle. And during this battle, Set clearly says to Heru, you have really learned the arts very well. Your mother has been a great instructor, but there's something she didn't tell you. She didn't tell you that I was the one that taught her. And so he proceeds to then destroy Heru. He beats Heru so viciously that in the story it seems that we should easily believe that Heru was killed. Heru's eye is torn from his head, and he falls amongst the marshy area near the Hapi, and Set believes that he is dead. But it is at that time, remember, Heru has the ability to have victory over death. And so Tehuti once more comes down to actually give him sacred wisdom. Now this is where we get the concept of the third eye from, by the way. The wisdom is described as the eye, the ujat. The ujat is this symbol of great wisdom. It is the sometimes called the eye of Heru, the eye of Ausar. Its most appropriate name is the ujat. It is the symbol for wisdom that Tehuti gives Heru. It is being described as an eye. Understand that Heru already had two eyes. So when he's given this new eye, it is the third eye. That's where we get the concept, the terminology for the third eye. But I know that I would probably, because this eye is a symbol of intuition and wisdom, it's probably most appropriately called the first eye rather than the third eye, because it is much more powerful than any physical eye that you could actually have. So Heru takes his final lessons from Tehuti, takes his final lessons from his mother, and then he goes to do battle once more with his uncle. In this battle, he wins. And instead of deciding to kill his uncle, in great wisdom he recognizes that his uncle is also an important aspect of the divine force. That in many ways he is the force of unbridled rage. He's the force of the scorching sun of the desert. And in fact, he is also described in Kemetic ideology and philosophy as our animal self. Those things that happen by the fact that we have been ensconced in this flesh. And so how can you destroy that? All of your animal urges are also there as well. Your ability to feel hunger, to feel sexual arousal, to feel the need to sleep, to feel the need of all of those things that the animal form needs. If you kill those things, you might be a spiritual being, but this form will die. So you can be really spiritual. Imagine if you had a society that was only practicing the Heru ideology and did not also understand the Set ideology. I'm sure that society would only last about a generation because no one would have intercourse in order to give birth. So this is why in the philosophy in ancient Kemet, we don't see Set killed. What we see is that Heru was given dominion of the whole land and Set is put in his rightful place. And so then you see on Kemetic imagery often Set and Heru tying the knot of Smaitawi. They become unified in a way that is powerful. And in fact, once again, this story, this great story has been retold in many different ways. I think one of the most entertaining ways it has been told is in the Matrix series. So those of you who have not seen the Matrix series or haven't seen it recently, understanding this story, you should rewatch it. Because remember, we see Neo lose his eye but still being able to see because he's using something other than his physical eyes, right? We see him do battle with that being that in some ways is the opposite of himself. And when he gets to the point where he's about to win, he doesn't destroy him, he becomes one with him. And that is where we see the victory that leads to the restoration of all of humanity. That is a retelling of the Heru story in a very entertaining manner. And so Heru then, as he defeats his uncle, becomes the victor. And this is when you see him depicted as the falcon. He's not depicted as the falcon before. He becomes the falcon when he is the victor. And that is also why you see him wearing the double crown. In some ways, mythologically, we are saying that he is the ruler of Kemet. Remember, he unifies with his uncle, so he is now the ruler of both lands. Not just two physical lands, but he has unified his understanding of his being. He's coming to full awakening of himself, and that is why you see him wearing the double crown. In many ways, this is the journey that we all must be on. Heru is the hero. In fact, the word hero is where we get the term Heru from. This is the journey that we all must be on. Understanding our spiritual divinity, while also mastering those things that are necessary in order for us to maintain this physical form. If you are able to be victorious on the path of Heru, you will actually be able to reclaim your divine self and to be a being of infinite power, of infinite understanding. And that is of critical importance in this journey that we all are on, because we are Heru. We are Heru.
So now, that's the essential story. And Heru now becomes the avatar and the example for all of the other kings that sat on the throne of Smaitawi, which is the actual name of the nation, which included modern day Kemet, Kush or Ethiopia, and Nubia and Sudan to the south. So this is the essential story of Ausar and Heru. Now let me break it down and show you how that story has significance for us today if we follow the thread of the legacy. When you look at what happened to African people, the body of African people is Ausar. We were cut into so many pieces and scattered to the four winds as chattel slaves, were we not? we said that the coffer containing the body of Ausar floated to the island of Byblos and got caught up in the roots of a tree. The roots of our legacy became contaminated by plagiarizers who stole this story. And when you look at it, you will realize that the copper being caught up in the root of a tree on the island of Byblos is exactly where we are in reference to the Bible, because the original word for Bible comes from the island of Byblos. So we are trapped inside the Bible, okay, on the island of Byblos. So our minds were put out to lunch away from our original story. The fact that the body of Ausar was cut into many pieces represents the many families that were put on board the slave ship and brought over to the west. Okay, the loss of the Henanum, the penis of Ausar, and thrown into the river and swallowed by a fish, is indicative of the fact that throughout the 2,160 years of the age of Pisces, we have not been in power. We've lost our capacity to regenerate ourselves as a nation, as a power. So you see, the legacy of Ausar and this story has a prophetic meaning. And you will find what I've just told you in no book written by any scholar or researched by any scholar, because this kind of research you have to do inside your own consciousness to come up with how does the story apply to our present condition today. And tell me if how I've just explained it does not make sense to you. Okay, if you're trying to comprehend what happened to us. So now it's our job to put the body of Ausar together. It means it's our job to reclaim our legacy, to put the story of our ascension together and to now undo the wrongs done by Set. So now each of us must become Heru, because once you know the story and you know that your original father's name is Ausar, that your mother is Ast, then who are you if not Heru? And if you are Heru, what is your job? Your job is to serush ma'at, to restore ma'at, to right the wrong that was done to your ancestors who were cut into many pieces and scattered to the four winds. It's now your job to recover your capacity to regenerate your power. That's what the meaning of the penis or the henanum being swallowed by the fish represents. So now you have got to reclaim your testicular fortitude, your balls, and stand up as a man, as a king, with your queen side by side, and to rule your consciousness once again.
It's what's happening now. You see, I want to make this clear. Even when we say we are the original people on the planet, that means a lot, but the first person who come out the blocks isn't the first person who's going to win the race. You have to endure. So this is why Africans have to resurrect themselves so we can finish this race back on top. What comes around, goes around. Because we are the original people, because we are the first, don't mean we're going to be the rulers. We are only trying to rule ourselves, and we have to take control of our legacy and our culture. And this Trinity is a perfect example of how to overcome adversary, how to overcome obstacles. Auset shows you her support of her husband. Even when he's dead, she doesn't give up. Our women have to stick with our men, even when it looks like we are persecuted and dead, because our women can help resurrect us.
In this entire story, I think we have to understand that the quest in the story is to become whole, and the quest is to regain the throne, right? Well, how can we say that the great characters, Ast and Heru, find their way back to the throne? They find their way back to the throne by remembering, putting the members back together, their ancestor. So in some ways, I think of it also as understanding that story of those individuals who came before you in order for you to understand your own story. This is a Sankofa moment. This is a moment where we have to go back and fetch it, where we have to understand the story of our ancestor in order for us to return to the throne. And so there's so many different ways for us to take aspects of this story and have them make sense today in our modern lives. It's not a story that should be seen as just an ancient story that only was applicable, interesting, helpful for people in the ancient world, but that it has aspects of it that are certainly helpful for us today. So let me say one other thing. When Heru takes victory, one of the myths say that he burst into the sky with the symbol of the sun with wings. So that symbol that we sometimes call the Heru Behudet or the winged sun disk is a symbol of victory over death, victory, spiritual transformation. We know that that symbol actually has now been utilized by many Western corporations. In fact, I find it interesting, Brother William, that there probably isn't a car company that hasn't used it. Why are car companies using it more than any others? I'm not sure if I can tell you that, but I do know that we see Chrysler use it, we see Aston Martin use it, we see Mini use it. In fact, if you see how many car companies are using it, you can then look at some of their logos and recognize that, for example, the Toyota logo, some people would say it's simply a T. No, it's another rendering. It's a stylistic rendering of the Heru Behudet. So we should understand that that winged sun disk has been used in many, many different ways. Some of what's happening is those Western civilizations have been signing what they say are their greatest achievements with the symbols and the names of our African ancestors. But what we have to do is recognize that what is in fact occurring is what I've always called the world's greatest instance of identity theft. As long as you don't understand who you are, as long as you don't remember your ancestors, anyone can benefit from those things that they created. And so it is of critical importance for us to go back and fetch it. It's of critical importance for us to understand what our ancestors did, what they gave to the world in order for us to be the fullest people we can today.
You are the only person that can resurrect us, just like Auset resurrects a song. Enough so that Heru can be born. And then Heru grows to be strong and powerful. And so the Trinity is really important. It lets us know that man's supposed to be with woman, woman's supposed to be with man, and a family is when you have children.
So you see, beloved brothers and sisters, it's time for you to go back and get your own story. You are children of the one that they call Ham in the Bible. It should have been Chem, not Ham. Not the pig or pig's flesh that we so love to eat and calling it soul food. Yeah, it's S-O-L-E food. Should be at the bottom of your feet, should be trampled, and should never enter into your mouth or your stomach, okay? So these are some of the tools you can use. You can use our legacy to see what happened to us and what we must do to reclaim ourselves, to reclaim our culture, to reclaim our spiritual way of being. Not religion, not dogma, but spiritual culture. We must arm ourselves once again with the 42 oracles of Ma'at from which the so-called 10 Commandments were taken. Okay? We need the original stuff. We have to be conservatives. We must be conservative of our ancestral legacy. I'm not talking about conservatism as it's being expressed politically today, which is nothing but a euphemism for racism. Okay? I'm talking about the conservation of divine principles by which we should govern our lives. Having said that, I'm out. That's it.
This can't be. What? You know what this is?
What is it, Buddha?
It's the book of life. In the beginning, when man arrived on Earth, the black gods that leave their spacecraft, and they walked, and they named the beast of the sea and the animals of the land.
Heavens.
And man in his blackness did walk the earth, making medicine.
Medicine.
They discovered type. These were all black people, goddamn! Wait a minute! This ain't, there ain't nothing in here about white. This is ours, Jack! Wait till the brothers hear this!
Buddha.
I'm gonna get this book out of here, baby! This tells me real tea!
Buddha,
Check this out!
self-control yourself. What you
What
say?
you mean, Jack? Look at this here! Black people discovered started the music and the brain surgery
Get the bulldozers. There's nothing here.
But.
Shut up!